Welcome to Google for those of us who are visiting today. My name is Carrie Laureno. I am the founder of the Google Veterans Network and head up our veteran outreach strategy here. Happy early Veterans Day to everyone in the room. I feel like we're among family today. I see so many familiar faces, both people who work here at Google, many of our nonprofit partners, distinguished guests from the military. Thank you all for being here today in celebration of Veterans Day, and to help us here at Google celebrate the way we wanted to, which is working towards our goal of bridging the civil-military divide. The reason that we're here today is to celebrate an exhibit that opened on Friday at the 9/11 Memorial Museum that is called The Call to Serve, recognizing the extraordinary service of our military in the immediate wake of the 9/11 attacks. After over a decade of war, there were, and everything that happened in Iraq, there were the immediate accomplishments of our military, frankly, were overshadowed, and there were so many early successes that are not brought to the light of day, and we wanted to help bring those stories to life and to recognize those individuals who made really, truly extraordinary achievements and contributions on behalf of all of us who have not served. We were fortunate enough to brainstorm about this idea with Michael Frazier, our friend and partner at the 9/11 Museum, the Executive Vice President of Communications and Marketing. Where are you, Michael? In the back, of course. So Michael and I had a conversation a couple months ago, and we said, you know, this is this incredibly beautiful museum that had just opened in May. What could we do in advance of Veterans Day to support the 9/11 Museum in their mission to recognize the overwhelming number of acts of compassion in the wake of 9/11, which is part of their mission. And we happen to have some technology that helps people tell stories. We launched it last year. It's called Google Tour Builder, and it enables anyone out there, any aspiring storyteller, to drop a pin on a map, add a little bit of copy to that, up to 25 photos and videos in one place, pull it all together in a beautiful storytelling format. And I like to joke that we built this so that my mom could do it without any assistance from me whatsoever. It's really that easy for any storyteller to go in and tell that, talk about their journey. And who has better stories to tell than the military? The most incredible achievements in the most amazing far-off places that most of us never have a chance to visit. And what if we could work together, the 9/11 Museum and Google, to bring those stories to life, to bring them to the museum, and to bring them into the public eye at a time when the public is tiring of the war. And there are a lot of other stories that are out there about service members. What if we could convince and coerce in the most positive way some of our most humble service members who truly have done amazing things to share their stories in a way that might inspire other service members to do the same. I've learned an important lesson from a friend and partner of ours, Colonel Jim Eisenhower, who is at the Joint Chiefs of Staff and runs the reintegration office for that team, has taught me a lesson that service members return to communities. And we want communities to be a place that are welcoming to our service members and their families, so that as they face those difficult chapters of transition that are ahead of them, that there's greater awareness and understanding about those issues, and that service members feel good about going home and are embraced by the people who do care about them the most in very practical, tangible ways. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of that today. We're going to share with you some of the exhibit here. I encourage all of you to go down to the museum this week during Veterans Week to see it before Friday. And if you haven't been able to see it, you can check it out online at 911memorial.org/call-to-serve. That will be there in perpetuity, and wonderful tribute to the gentleman that you're going to meet in a few minutes. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite all of our guests on stage to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet your storytellers and these incredible service members. So from the look of it, I was asking Colonel Collins if there were any women who served in Afghanistan in 2001. And the answer is probably no, but I'm here to represent all the women that followed in their footsteps. So I'd like to start with introductions. We have a large group of people here. Everybody has a unique story. I know these gentlemen extremely well at this point, having worked with them, and my team having worked with them to develop these stories. But they didn't know each other until last night. And to bring a Coastie together with a West Point professor together with a Marine Recon professional and several Special Forces guys was a really interesting experience last night. So, in the spirit of diversity, this is your United States military here. So let's start with Brandon Brewer. I'm going to quickly do introductions. Brandon was a U.S. Coast Guard veteran in the Public Affairs Office. He was on duty a few blocks from the World Trade Center and witnessed the attacks and the maritime evacuation of the city. He shot aerial photographs of Ground Zero and the Homeland Security efforts underway there for several weeks. Retired from the Coast Guard in 2012 and was telling me last night how much he missed it. So we'll ask you why you missed it a little bit later. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Joe Quinn, U.S. Army veteran. Joe is the Northeast Regional Director for Team Red, White, and Blue, which is we're proud to be a partner of this wonderful veteran service organization here in New York and around the country. Joe was finishing his last year at West Point when Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower, killing his brother James, who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. And he, prior to working with Team Red, White, and Blue, he was an associate at the Combating Terrorism Center and instructor in the Department of Social Sciences at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He also worked in Afghanistan, counterinsurgency work. He spent 6 years in the Army, 2 deployments to Iraq, and received his master's degree in public policy from the Kennedy School. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Dill, U.S. Marine Corps. Happy birthday, sir. For those who don't know, today is where are the Marines? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Dill was conducting training in Australia on 9/11. His unit immediately deployed to prepare for the invasion of Afghanistan. They were a part of the first conventional force to enter the country, seizing Kandahar International Airport. He began his military career enlisting in the Marine Corps in February of 1993, attended Texas Tech, went on to be commissioned as a second lieutenant, and had multiple assignments. His service included 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, multiple deployments to Africa. Mr. Mark Nooch. Mark Nooch is a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran from Leavenworth, Kansas. Thanks for making the trip here today. Mark is the former commander of Operational Detachment 595, one of the very first units to insert into Afghanistan to arrest Mazar al-Sharif from the Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. ODA 595 is also known as the Horse Soldiers, for those of you who have heard about that group of extraordinary men. Mark retired from the Army and continues to do contract work in Afghanistan, and he is working on a book about his experiences. He wants to write it himself from his perspective along with his teammates, and that's something that we're really excited to read when it comes out. Scotty Neal, U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, Director of Strategic Development for the Green Beret Foundation from Tampa, Florida. Scott was in a Green Beret training exercise when the towers fell. He immediately deployed to Afghanistan with the objective of destroying al-Qaeda training camps. He spent 25 years in the Army Special Forces with multiple combat tours in the 5th Special Forces Group, and he was later a senior enlisted advisor to the director of the U.S. Special Operation Command's Interagency Task Force at MacDill Air Force Base. Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Liam Collins, also U.S. Army Special Forces, is the Director of Defense and Strategic Studies Program at U.S. Military Academy at West Point, our neighbor. Lieutenant Colonel Collins was conducting an interagency exercise in Hungary when the towers fell. Less than a month later, he deployed to Afghanistan to hunt Taliban and al-Qaeda targets. For his second operation, he parachuted in from 18,000 feet. He is a career Special Forces officer who has served in a variety of special operations assignments, combat operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, multiple deployments to Bosnia, Africa, South America. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in aerospace engineering from West Point, Master in Public Affairs from Princeton University, my alma mater, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and a doctorate from Princeton as well. His research centers on military innovation during times of war. And last but not least, Master Sergeant Eric Stebner, U.S. Army Ranger, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment from El Paso, Texas, originally from North Dakota. Master Sergeant Stebner had a boyhood dream of becoming a Ranger, and he pursued this. He deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Anaconda, which you'll hear more about. In all, he completed 10 post-9/11 combat tours, 6 in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan. And he will retire from the Army in a couple of weeks, November 26th. Here comes the embarrassing part. Sergeant Stebner was awarded the Silver Star Medal for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving as a squad leader during combat operations in support of, and in this operation that I mentioned called Anaconda. And it's something that I'm excited for you all to hear about and to know about what happened there and the actions that he took. So quite an amazing group of people on this panel. Brandon, I'd love to start with you and your journey. Tell us more about where you were on 9/11 and where that took you in terms of your service.
Okay. Well, I wasn't with Yogi Berra, but I figured if I'm going to talk to people in New York, what better New Yorker to have next to me. I had a picture with Scooter too, so I had to flip a coin to see if it was Yogi or Scooter. But like you said, I was on duty here in New York during 9/11. If you've seen the tiny little 3-story building on one side of Battery Park up against the water, that's the Coast Guard building here in the city, and that's where I was that morning. And you know, I guess I can kind of run through a little quick chronology. I'm a little bit of a talker. Where's my wife? She knows this. She's a listener. I'm a talker. So, you know, like a lot of people that were here that day, we didn't really know what was going on at first. And you know, I was there at the Battery, and a coworker let us know that something happened, that a plane had hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And you know, I think a lot of people thought, you know, this was just some kind of an accident. You know, maybe somebody had a small plane and they went off course, and it was just a very tragic accident. And we quickly knew that it wasn't when the second plane hit, and so many people then knew what happened. So as the day went on, you know, that's Battery Park right there on the screen, on the Earth side of the screen. So being in the city and staying in the city throughout, you know, that chaotic day, we still didn't fully realize the significance of what we were witnessing. And if you look at the photos that are scrolling through right there, you know, you can see a lot of the folks that were trying to evacuate the city, and this was happening all around us. And you know, what we didn't know, we knew that the Coast Guard was helping to coordinate the maritime component of the evacuation, but what we didn't know was that in the course of about 8 hours, 500,000 people would be evacuated by water, which is a very amazing story. It's the biggest maritime evacuation in the history of the world. So that was a part of what we were seeing going on around us.
Joe?
Yeah, so I was a senior, what they call first year at the United States Military Academy at West Point at the time. I feel bad. We did an earlier version of this at the 9/11 Museum, and you hear a lot of the same bad jokes coming at you. But
Everybody here was working earlier today.
okay.
Not the same crew. They're still good jokes.
Okay, good, good. No, but yeah, I was an English major at West Point, which is kind of odd. It's kind of an oxymoron, and also, yeah. And I'm also from Brooklyn, which kind of adds to it. And the joke is that Walt Whitman was also from Brooklyn, so take that, So yeah, I was in a Native American literature class, and then kind of the thing at West Point, if you've ever been there, it's like mice in a maze. Like everything's on clockwork. There's no spare time. And I remember leaving class that day, and there was something off about the kind of the movements of the cadets. And then I found myself on the back to my barracks room where I was going to hit the rack. That's what cadets do on their downtime. They sleep. Colonel Collins knows this pretty well. And getting there, my roommate, saying, "Turn on the television." And television was actually something new at West Point at the time. And we had these huge, giant computers that they were the size of microwaves, maybe something new to younger Googlers here. Instead of these old laptops. I remember clicking in and seeing what everyone else has kind of seen that time, just seeing the Twin Towers on fire. And it really didn't look that bad, from the size of the towers. I remember that was my initial reaction. And talking to my mother later, she would say, her first words out of her mouth was, "Oh my goodness, we're at war, and my son's at West Point." Never really imagining the unfathomable was that my brother Jimmy worked in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He worked for a company called Cantor Fitzgerald, which lost all 658 of their employees. So I remember trying to get out of West Point. I finally got out of West Point the next day and going down to the scene and just seeing the absolute destruction. I was telling Eric before that I never saw destruction that you looked up at and not kind of down at. And then eventually making my way back to my childhood home in Marine Park, Brooklyn, which was a neighborhood that was a lot of firemen. That was your choice. You were either cop, fireman, or if you were good at math, you went to Wall Street. Which my brother was terrible at math, but he was good at bullshitting, so that's that's how he got to Cantor Fitzgerald. But no, and then my world was obviously turned upside down, and but one of the things, obviously, this is kind of personal in nature, but I think everyone's world changed, especially everyone that I'm privileged to be up here with. So afterwards, I, with help from a lot of understanding professors, I graduated West Point, and then within a year and a half later, I was in Iraq in 2003, and it was just it was incredible. But I didn't tell you, I was also recruited to play basketball at West Point, which you could probably obviously tell by my physique. So I remember there's just so many moments. We started in Fallujah, then Ramadi, and then hit, and then just kind of went through Western Anbar with 3rd ACR, and just rebuilding and moving on. And then I remember just one of my soldiers saying, it was just an incredible experience being a 21-year-old kid at West Point, and then all of a sudden, a year later, here you are in Iraq. So that was kind of my initial foray into combat.
Thank you. Colonel Dale.
Okay, so I was in Darwin, Australia when 9/11. It was actually September 12th, but being on the other side of international date line. What I was doing there, I was part of a 3,000-man Marine unit that was actually on its forward deployed. I'd been training for the past year to respond to a crisis contingency type situation. Generally, Marine expeditionary units, when they're called up to respond to a crisis or a contingency, it's usually, there's unrest in a country, so they're evacuating an embassy or something small scale, or a humanitarian assistance disaster response situation in like a natural disaster type situation. But in this situation, we went from being prepared for something like that to going into Afghanistan, which we're also prepared for conventional operations. But we had just finished a week of training. We'd been deployed about a month at that point, and so we were on the town that night, getting ready. We were going to leave the next day, so we had a night of liberty, and we tried to go into this one place. I'd been on the compound with the guys that we'd been training with for the week, and they only had Australian rules football on the TV. So as the news was coming in, we were kind of unaware of it, and we went out into town, and we tried to get into one place, and they told us no, the World Trade Center had been bombed, was the word they used, and didn't sound plausible. So we tried going in next door. We'd actually been to the place next door before, and it was a pretty hopping place, and it was completely different when we went in this time. There's a picture of it right there, but it was a totally different vibe. Everyone was kind of crowded around these TV screens, these big screens, and I couldn't see what was on the screen because there was a crowd in front of them. But I think the word I used this morning was a hollow feeling, just because the way everyone was looking at the screens. I got that as I walked in and I saw that, and then as I made my way closer, you get close enough, you start to be able to see through the people, and once I got close enough where I could actually see the screens, the first image I saw were the towers, and they were still smoking at that point. And I turned to my friend and said, I think we need to go back to the ship, and everything changed after that, and I was in Pakistan a month later, and Afghanistan a month after that.
And what were you doing in Pakistan? What was the objective of going to, most people think that you would go directly to Afghanistan. Why Pakistan?
Well, what we had to do was we had to establish some forward bases in Pakistan, and one of them was at Jacobabad Airfield. There were a couple others, and it was at that time allowing, there were what we called lily pads to enable forces to build up in a somewhat benign environment like Pakistan, and then be able to move into Afghanistan from there. Also, what they were doing was it was a place for fighters to divert, that were having emergencies. It was also a place for some of the soft forces that went in initially, like especially early, to launch from there. I think maybe Liam will get into that. I watched in jealousy one night as the Rangers and some other forces refueled at Jacobabad to go in and hit Mullah Amar's house, the leader of the Taliban. So anyway,
that's a good
that answer your
segue.
question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mark.
On 9/11, just a few days before that, I had completed 2 years of my typical assignment as a Special Forces captain in a detachment commander role. And we had deployed a lot throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. Prior to 9/11, my team had spent a great deal of months in Uzbekistan working with the Uzbek Special Forces, which is a typical mission that our Special Forces conducts, working with coalition partners and such around the world. But these guys were already at war, and this was in 2000, and they were fighting against Al-Qaeda-based affiliates in the Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, in that area. On 9/11, my wife was 7 months pregnant, and I happened to be home that morning with her. We had an OB appointment, and we were getting ready to go to that. And so we saw what was happening on the television, and had a couple young boys at home, then 3 and 4, and they're seeing the television before we realized what was going on and got it turned in their room. But they're already asking questions over the next few days of why did somebody fly these planes into these buildings, and to explain to your sons, they knew we were in Special Forces and what we do, and just said, hey, Dad is got to go find some bad guys. It was an emotional day, emotional time. to do that. And then over the next few days, as I got into work, then was notified a couple days later that I was going to be put right back on my team, and that our team had been picked out of the 5th Special Forces Group to be one of the first deployed. And we didn't really know what our mission was going to be yet, except that we were going to a then undisclosed location, which turned out to be in Uzbekistan. Another one of these early staging bases like Colonel Dill and his guys set up in Pakistan. But that would become our Special Operations Task Force staging base. And that's kind of how 9/11 unfolded for me.
Scotty?
Yay. All right. Get the microphone now. No, actually, 9/11, and Mark sort of knows it because it was actually his team that was escorting us. We were in a training exercise getting ready to go into the Middle East one October, and we were part of an element called the Commanders in Extremis Force that the regional combatant commander could use to deploy at any time in case there was some immediacy in there. So we thought this was actually part of the training exercise. And I remember very vividly sitting there, because when you're in isolation, you're just fed information. Your partner team, controls anything coming in and out. That way you don't have outside influences, and you're focused on this simulated terrorist attack, which at the time we thought was what was going on, because he walked in and he wrote on the board that the World Trade Center had been hit. And it wasn't really till about 4 or 5 hours later when everything came together and they said, no, this is really happening. So we were, pretty much ready to go anyways into the area. But initially we deployed into Kuwait, where we already had an initial presence there. And then I was sent immediately to the Embassy of Yemen to work with other agency partners to determine. There was this big initial outpour from all the other countries, and they obviously, started wondering what they could do to support our efforts and really to get into this. So everybody was lining up and wanting to support the American effort. And then from there, just like everybody else, we went to another location, a small island, and we prepared to go into Kandahar. So what you're seeing now is another task force called Task Force K-Bar, which was led by a SEAL at the time, but it was all the other countries' efforts of special operators that came together in one location. So you had the English, the Australians, New Zealanders, the Dutch, just a whole mixture of the SEALs, and all of us would come together. And at that time, the unconventional forces had really routed the Taliban and their leadership, and they were so fractured, which made them vulnerable. And we used that opportunity to really, take those battlefield leaders off the battlefield.
Colonel Collins.
All right, so on 9/11, I was in Budapest, Hungary, as part of an interagency exercise that we were working over there. I remember somebody walking in the room, and this is prior to having satellite TV everywhere, so we didn't have TV screens all over the wall. And somebody said the tower had been hit by an airplane, just thought it was maybe like one of these small, little commuter aircraft or something that hit it. And about 20 or 30 minutes later, whenever he came back in and told us the second one hit, kind of knew that at that point it was a terrorist attack, because I've been focused on counterterrorism since probably about 98, 99. So that pretty much ended the exercise for us. I was the only one from my unit that was on this exercise, so I was wanting to get back home because I knew we were going to be deploying soon. When I went to sleep that night, thought on it a little bit, and I kind of believed that it would be a long war. I wasn't even married or had kids yet, but I figured it's going to be a war that they were going to be fighting into their as they grew up. So I figured it was going to be a decades-long war. So quickly got back to Fort Bragg, and there was no intelligence, so it took a while to kind of actually get over there. We finally got over there and into Afghanistan the first time in September, mid to early September. Didn't know Eric. I probably ran into Eric without knowing it at an airfield somewhere. I guess his security guys did let him put more on here than mine put on here, so good for him. I can actually pick out points on a map, but that's what they let me put out there sometimes. So they may not be the right place, but they're the right country. And then we came out of the first time, and then went back in November. The second time, and the second time we went back in on the earlier in the month. I remember talking to one of our intelligence analysts, asking him how long he thought the Taliban would fall in Kabul, and he's like, "Yeah, it'd probably take a year or two." Looking at how long it took the Russians to do it, and then 2 days later, then Kabul had kind of fallen. And so that night, our commanding general asked us if we could get into Afghanistan the next day to watch the highway basically going between Kabul and Kandahar, and told them, yeah, we can get in, but we're going to have to jump in. It's the only way we can get in safely. And so he said, go ahead and do it. So then that's how we went back into Afghanistan the second time.
Sergeant Stebner.
9/11, the night before we had a training exercise. We trained pretty late into the night, so they usually give us a little earlier work call the next morning. So I woke up, was going into work later than usual, got in the shower, turned the shower radio on. So yes, actually when 9/11 came, I was caught with my pants down. But heard it on the radio. I didn't really believe it. I thought it was some talk show gimmick, something on the radio. Got my roommate's attention, came in, told him to go turn the TV on. It was kind of an impact to me because we were in what we call Ready Force 1 status. It's from when the first call's made, we had 2 hours to be into work, ready to go wherever, and they claim we could be anywhere in the world, boots on the ground in 18 hours. So I thought that was really my chance, thought we were going. Headed into work, traffic wasn't too bad till I got closer to post, and it was endless to try to even get on post. Parked my car, literally ran onto post, ran to work because wanted to get there as fast as I could, and thought we were going to deploy. We never did, which seemed odd to me. Eventually, they ended up taking 3rd Ranger Battalion out of Fort Benning, and they did a jump into Objective Rhino, Kandahar Airfield, and thought I was actually going to miss out on my chance to be able to go to war. And I don't know, everyone up here, you do something, you train, it'd be doing things at Google, and you never get to actually do anything on the website or apply into it. Thought I was going to miss my chance. And then rumors started coming around that we were going to get to go to Afghanistan. Had a few failed attempts trying to leave due to aircraft problems. But I did eventually end up making my way to Bagram Airfield on New Year's Eve of 2001. So I got to wake up to the new year in Bagram Airfield in 2002.
Let's talk a little bit about what happened there, and specifically the Battle of Roberts Ridge.
We spent our time training, did a lot of training. Rangers, they train. We're not the SF guys. We're not that cool.
SF guys don't train? You don't have to.
They work out.
They train.
They train. Liam, Colonel Collins, you, rumor has it that you can run a 6-minute mile. Is that true? Is that
For 26.2 miles.
okay? Okay, so we've established that they work out and they train, but you were training that day.
We train a lot. We'd go here and there. We went to Kandahar, trained. We were basically staged in Bagram. 250 soldiers started out there. Little small compound, few tents. Our main mission was to be a QRF, or a quick reaction force, or 911 to whatever kind of would happen in Afghanistan. We'd been called on a few things. And one night, I think it was our night, we were allotted for the showers. We had a block time to take showers. And
Once a week, right?
yeah, once a week. In the middle of the night, we'd have to wake up. So everyone kind of woke up to shower. Went there, the pipes were frozen. Couldn't get our shower for the week. It was fun. Heard rumors there was a mission coming. It wasn't our standard was to, when we were told 10 minutes on the vehicles, ready to go. That wasn't going that fast. It seemed like kind of a slower night. Eventually made our way down to the airfield. Heard there was a Navy SEAL that fell off a helicopter in the vicinity of an airfield in Koust. So seemed pretty easy. Hearing reports, they had him on the ISR watching him. There were some people around him. Was he already rescued? Not. A lot of broken, missed communication. And we were ready to load 2 helicopters. We were told only one was going to go. Don't always get answers why. Got back on the vehicles. We were ready to go, and they gave us the 2nd aircraft to go in. So we took off, flew around for a while, it's hard to hear back in the early part of the deployments, I guess. You didn't have communication pieces to hear. It was loud, and didn't really know what was going on, to be honest. And we were flown back to Gardez, and we touched down. Didn't really know again what was going on. And then we were told that we were going to be going in. They located where the SEAL was. We were flying in, and on our way in, the news we got on the aircraft was our first helicopter had gone down. There were 3 killed in action right from the start of it, and told us we were going into a hot LZ. Flew in, helicopter sort of touched down. Immediately got off the helicopter in waist-deep snow, and the helicopter flew away. There wasn't a single shot fired, and it was like, felt kind of lost. You were expecting to get shot at right away, and there was nothing. But then as you looked up the mountain, you could see jets coming in and doing gun runs on the top of the mountain, and we were told we were set in an offset location, which was about 2,000 feet below the peak of 10,500 feet, and a straight line distance of 700 meters. So it was a fun 2.5-hour climb to get to the top of the mountain.
In waist-deep snow.
Some waist-deep snow. And once we got up there, there wasn't really a time for a break because the perimeter, the area wasn't secured yet. And we immediately organized assault teams to take out some bunkers and a little trench line that was up there. And then it succeeded into moving casualties from the day. There were 7 killed in action that day, and I think 6 wounded. I'm having a brain crap now. Don't quote me. Don't Google it. And we were up there for a total of 18 hours, and eventually that night, once they deemed it was safe enough to bring other aircraft in, they brought the aircraft in and let us exfil from the mountain from that day.
And you're being quite humble about your actions taken that day. If I remember from reading correctly from your tour that you carried 12 service members up the mountain. Is that correct? And one of those was your best friend,
Yes.
Sergeant Crows.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about Sergeant Crows.
He was treated him pretty much like a brother. His mom blessed me off as her son now. I'm the closest thing she has left to him from there. I kind of talked about it earlier. Joe laughed at it. I don't know. I did a lot with him. Went to his house for Thanksgiving. Really a neat family. Brad was really a super neat individual. First time I met his mom, I went to his house for Thanksgiving. 3 of us went. She called and spoke to us before we went. She's like, hey, when you come, I want you to feel like you're at home. Tell me 3 things you had at Thanksgiving, growing up. I told her 3 things, so did the other 2 guys. When we actually showed up at Thanksgiving, in addition to everything she made, there were 9 other dishes, 3 for each of us. Christmas, I didn't do anything with him for Christmas. He came back from Jacksonville, and he's walked in my room one night, and he's like, hey, tell my mom thanks for the stocking. I was like, okay, get on the phone. I'm like, hey, Sheila, thanks for the stocking. She's like, did you like it? I was like, yeah, I did. The next day, Brad gave me the stocking. That's the only grudge I have against him. In it, there were $50 gift cards to Carrabba's, calling cards. It was probably a $400 stocking. And I was like, Brad, I didn't know. And he goes, no, it was just a stocking. Ended up taking him home to North Dakota after Christmas because we had our block leave then. Drove into North Dakota, had a mishap on the road. The car ended up flipping end over end upon entering North Dakota. And of course, both of us were driving with no shoes on. So from him being from Florida, I was like, welcome to North Dakota. Every window was knocked out of the car. We both jumped out, nothing but socks. And had a few moments with Brad, as everyone in the military does, some sort of bond or blend with a friend, a colleague, whatever.
Mark, your team is known as the Horse Soldiers. Can you tell us why? And can you tell us about the very special statue that's down by the 9/11 memorial?
Yeah, my team, my special forces team, was one of the first sent in to northern Afghanistan about mid-October. The same night that Liam and his element had evidently passed through Colonel Dill's position, possibly, some of them. While that was happening with their mission against Mullah Omar's compound, my team was helicoptered into the north, into the mountains. And the very first morning we were there, if you click on that photo, as that's playing, if you would, on that point. With that first morning, a guy named General Abdul Rashid Dostum, one of the Uzbek militia commanders that was renowned in that region, been actively fighting against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And this is a guy that my team was tasked to meet with. And he come riding up on horseback, and that was how their force was moving. And so within hours, 6 men from my team, including myself, mounted horses and rode off to go to General Dostum's headquarters. And for the men on my team, although they're highly trained special forces sergeants, horseback riding in the 21st century wasn't something even in the special forces at that time that you typically do. But fortunately, I had grown up on a cattle ranch and had rodeoed through high school. In Kansas, we have high school rodeo teams, okay?
Just like on the Upper East Side.
Yeah. But I attended college and while doing ROTC, competed on the collegiate rodeo team, actually, several years. So anyway, had this incredible experience to literally at the Gallop teach my guys how to ride horseback with our military gear on, and we're riding to keep up with the Afghans. And it's a macho thing. You can't, you don't want to look like you're inexperienced horseback rider with these guys. So anyway, this started our incredible Wild West experience over the next several weeks of riding horseback every day. And the guys on my team took to it. We tried to walk a couple days, and because we were just frustrated with these half-trained animals. Or if anybody rides horses in here, I don't know. Is that allowed at Google? I see you have scooters up and down the hall. Anyway, so we rode horses over the next several weeks while we're doing combat operations, and we're calling in close air strikes, and we're organizing this army that we grew of out of these different Afghan ethnic groups of Uzbeks and Tajiks and Hazaras, and this melting pot of tribes that rallied around us. But that American presence, gave them hope to fight against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and we learned about their stories firsthand. I have a very unique experience than what even guys in special forces have experienced over the years. As we now have armored vehicles, and you see, then that's what everybody expects of American soldier right now is body armor from head to toe, and you're riding around in armored vehicles. And we didn't have armor. We didn't take body armor. We didn't wear it while we were in the mountains.
Why?
Moving around. One, it was a weight issue of just what we were carrying. With moving everything around by donkey or on man-portable loads by horseback. And the other thing is, honestly, how's that look when I'm wearing body armor, but the guys I'm working alongside do not have body armor? They have limited ammunition, small arms. They're wearing tennis shoes, literally, and the winter's coming on. So we didn't have body armor in there for that point. Now, later in other missions, after we got out of the mountains and we liberated the key city of Mazar-i-Sharif a few weeks later, and our mission focus kind of changed, and we would wear some body armor. But Special Forces does that on some occasions for the teams that have particular missions, where we're trying to embed and work with the locals. And it's kind of hard to establish a relationship with people on the street if you look like, to them, someone from outer space.
How do Green Berets how did your 12 Green Berets, which is how Green Berets work in groups of 12, build an army of 3,000 fighters from multiple different tribes, speaking a different language, riding on horseback? How did you inspire the creation of a literal cavalry?
As I said, the American presence there meant so much to them, and that we were willing to share hardships. We're sharing meals with them. We slept at the finest Afghan hotels, which were caves or a bunker, or you're sleeping on the ground. You're sharing that hardship with them, and you're living and working, fighting alongside them. But we were able to meet with these different ethnic leaders one-on-one, and in some cases, our language skills were sufficient enough to get across the basic skills and the basic points of your conversation. At other points, we had to rely on some Afghan interpreters, which their English was as bad as my Dari or Uzbek at the time. But the Central Intelligence Agency had a team there, and we worked closely with them. And so they were able to help facilitate some of the deeper conversations that needed to occur. But as we met with each of these 4 different factional leaders, which had been fighting against each other even literally weeks before, but we were able to get them to sit down and come together in what was called an area commanders meeting, where it was, think of a 3-day planning conference in a building in a small village in the mountains, and we got these guys to work together and come up with a plan, and then how we could support that plan. But really, by the actions of my sergeants, and building that relationship with the different commanders, we were able to help grow that army and give them hope. I don't know how else to explain that. What a significant thing that was to have American servicemen there on the ground to help them, give them hope that there could be a better future for Afghanistan.
And your wife gave birth to your youngest child while you were
yes.
while you were doing that.
As I said earlier, my wife was 7 months pregnant when I deployed, and we were in a Babies R Us, actually. The wives are going to stone me as I tell this part, but we were in a Babies R Us in Nashville when I got the phone call about the 15th of September that I was being put back on my team, and we deployed out, soon thereafter. But my wife Amy was a high-risk pregnancy, and she gave birth to our daughter Kaya. The team wives supported her and all that, and by the time they had notified the chain of command and they called me, I was orchestrating a major offensive that we were about to kick off across the northern provinces. This is about she was born on the 30th, so this was, I don't know, the 31st or so. But I got this strange message to use the sat phone and to call home. And I did, and I had a few minutes with my wife, who was already home with our daughter, and our family had come in to help her and be around her. I think Colonel Collins said this earlier, is you have to be able to compartment, and so had that phone call and ended that line, because you can't tell them where you're at or what you're doing.
Yeah.
But had a few private minutes and then ran off and told Bob, my chief warrant officer, and a couple of the other guys that were there in that position. But then we went right back to planning that attack, and we launched a major cavalry charge. Literally the next day. My daughter was 4 months old before I got home, and we just celebrated her. I'm bad at math. 13th.
13th birthday.
And
Colonel-
Ranger, N is for knowledge, right?
Colonel Collins, tell us what happens when you're at 18,000 feet and you decide to jump out of an airplane.
Well, people sometimes ask, probably all of us up here, why do we jump out of a perfectly good airplane? It's because we know the pilots. It's a lot safer than landing. Yeah, so we jumped out. Yeah, it was dark. It was really dark. Usually you got some ambient light out there, but there's no ambient light in Afghanistan in 2001. So we jumped when there was 0% illumination. So the moon was down. It was dark, and I was the youngest guy. I mean, I just taken command. I just finished our Halo school, they call it, or military free fall school. So I was,
This is your first combat tour ever.
Right. So over there, and so I'm the young guy on the team, but I'm also the commander of the team. So you don't want to be the one that screws it up, because then all officers ever after you get you wreck it for all of them. So I wasn't going to do that. Luckily, I didn't. I just about hit the guy underneath me when I just about landed on the guy underneath me. So it was. That part worked out pretty well. We ended up getting to our position. Two of the teams, we got to our position where we could kind of see the road and call in CAS, or close air support, drop bombs on Taliban vehicles. One team didn't get as far as we wanted to that night. They put up camouflage netting. Great thing about camouflage netting is it works really well for people, but the animals really, apparently we found out early on that they really like it because there's no vegetation. When they see movement, that means it's chow time. So some goats who were probably like 3 miles off saw the camouflage netting and walked right toward these guys. And the goat herders were about 5 feet from them before they finally saw them with the goats chewing on their SATCOM antenna. So despite everything, we still felt like we had a pretty good position. Those guys had to move, but I didn't want to be the guy that came back and wrote a book and had a movie about everything that went wrong. So we got those guys where they had to go. We were confident in our abilities and moved to a good place. Luckily, I do remember our fire support officer who was in charge of the close air support, which was not close at all because I don't think it came down below 25,000 feet the whole time we were there. I guess the Afghanis had some really good air defense weapons that I never saw. But they told us that we'd have CAS stacked up for days, probably like the rest of these guys. So once the team got compromised, we wanted to call them in and bring them on station in case we needed them. And sure enough, 3 hours later, we finally got somebody close. So luckily, we didn't need them for at least 3 hours, or it wouldn't have been much good to us. And then maybe we would have had a book and movies and stuff. But it worked out pretty well for us. Eventually, we got to our positions, and then we were able to take out some Taliban vehicles.
Let's talk about books and movies for a second. There's a lot of news out there right now about people telling their stories, in particular some Navy SEALs. And I just want to hear the reactions of people on this panel about what it's like to share information and share the stories and the way that you're sharing them now versus the way that perhaps others are choosing to share.
So, I think we're all discussed that, and internally you see everybody here being very humble about, what their accomplishments were, because they never think of themselves. There's a whole lot of we in this panel right here, not a lot of I. And a lot of discussion internally, especially in the special ops community and the recon community and everything else, is, these things are best kept, under the radar, and it's how we still continue to operate. But then there's also a certain aspect of why we're here and starting to share stories, because here we are, have never met each other until this tour happened, and yet we start to realize that we were all in the same space at the same time, trying to achieve the same thing. So there's that final mix of storytelling, and storytelling's been happening since cavemen were putting palm prints on caves. And unless we capture some of these aspects, we have a whole nother generation behind us that really don't know some of the commitments and sacrifices that we've made. So it takes a leap of faith to come in here and just tell a bit of the story that you're allowed to tell, and yet highlight what you want to tell the story about, and that's about how we responded as America to those days here in New York and D.C. and Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. And along that ethos of the we and not I, there's a statue that I'd like to show a picture of that's down by the PATH train near the 9/11 memorial. That is known affectionately as or casually as the horse soldier. And when Mark and I were working together on his tour and trying to figure out what the description should be for that tour, we started the paragraph, as saying, known as the horse soldier, ... and to tell his story. And Mark was adamant that we should, that he did not want to be called the horse soldier because he led a team of horse soldiers. I just need to point that out because it became very clear to me that even talking about himself as an individual was an uncomfortable thing, and it wasn't an appropriate thing for him because of that very reason, because they operate in teams. Something that's been really interesting to see over the last 24 hours is that chapter of history filling itself in and watching you all speak to each other and realizing you were in the same places at the same time, but you never had met each other, and some of you had heard of each other but not met of each other. It seems like there are whole chapters of history to still be written by individuals like yourselves who are the actual storytellers. What's the value in telling your own story versus having someone tell it for you?
Well, do that one again. What's unique is because I now work for a nonprofit where I get to communicate this. So being part of an organization, a desire, great storytelling usually starts within a small group. And then how do, we tell our own stories to each other and then allow others to see that story and capture from it? Because we were talking about earlier, I have so many questions I want to ask Mark and Liam and everybody else. And they're questions from people that were there. And I want to spend more time engaging where, how do we, capture these stories about ourselves told to each other, edited to each other. And that's, especially with this tour here. And what I found also is that the family becomes curious with you in your tour as well. And they actually learn more than you've ever been able to speak to them.
Several of you, I'd say almost all of you, didn't necessarily sign up for this project and say, yes, pick me, I'd love to do this. Colonel Dill, I'd love you to share your reaction when we first spoke.
Well, prior to us speaking, I said no. So I had to. It took coming around to it. It's awkward to do this, particularly, So the Special Forces model is quiet professionals. For the recon community, we strive to keep from seeking recognition. So we have, we do little things like, if you end up in the base paper or, any type of publication, you owe the team a beer or a case of beer, and God forbid you get your picture in there. I won't even go there. But so you do little stuff like that to teach people to not to be attention seeking and to be a team player. So I was contacted by one of the officers I respect most in the Marine Corps, and he mentioned this. So I, with a little persuasion and then thinking about like what this might mean, getting towards the end of my career, and thought about my grandfather. I'd asked him about World War II quite a bit, and there was some sort of diversion or some sort of some other reason not to talk about it. But then when I was in college, he gave me a journal that he had written. He was in a B-24 bomber crew, and he kept a journal of every mission he did over Europe when things were still pretty rough. And I thought, well, maybe this is, with modern technology, this is my way to give a journal something lasting, something enduring that my kids can appreciate. So the tour builder is kind of my version of a small journal, like what my grandfather did.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll add to what Colonel Collins said. I didn't have any grandfathers in the military or anything like that, but you hear stories like that of veterans who, oh, my grandpa, he served in World War II. He never really talked about it. Eventually, he died. We found a box in the garage, went through it, stuff we don't even know what it was. was just put away after the war. I usually don't openly come out and push and throw. It'll take you a long time to find out I'm in the military when you meet me. But if I'm, and a lot of people think that you can't ask questions. If you ask questions, I'll talk. I don't have a problem. I'm just not a person that throws it forward. So, you know, maybe why don't you know about your grandpa? I don't know. Try to talk to him. Try to ask him. And then in addition to it all, why you will talk or why you'll come forward and tell stories like this. There are people that are killed in action that they die. If they die and the story's never told, to me they die. But if you keep them alive by telling a story or do things, setting up organizations, funds, some way to keep them alive or those alive to keep it going, it does inform people, and then maybe people will ask questions, but, you know, ask veterans questions. You see one, go say hi to them. They'll love to talk to you. So.
Yes, Carrie.
Gotta turn it on.
Yeah, just to add to that, you know, just listening to these stories, you know, sitting here listening to them, to think, you know, why my family had a, you know, empty place at the table during the holidays, that these gentlemen were out there doing what they're doing. So I just want to say personally thank you, and if everyone put your hands together for everyone here. And so that's the reason why I think that's the importance of telling these stories, and it is a kind of a catch-22 of being humble. But you know, one of the things is, as less of a percentage of our society has served, it's more about meeting civilians halfway, and doing that halfway is being able to try to do the best you can to tell about your experiences, not only for yourself but for those that represent, whether you're, you know, your team or your unit.
Was it easy for you to tell your story?
No, I mean, yes, it was very difficult. You know, and I've sort of been quiet about it, especially the early on. You know, especially the 9/11 stuff for a long time. But to go to what Eric was saying, it's a great way to remember people, and you know, and it's fantastic that we have technology nowadays that helps us to keep that memory alive, and you know, keep my brother's memory alive and those that have lost their lives, because I know everyone would agree that those are the real heroes, are the ones that paid the ultimate sacrifice. So the least we could do is kind of tell the stories of them, good ones, bad ones, the truth.
And after going through that experience over the last several weeks and working on your own to build these stories and tell them in your own words, what did it feel like to go to the museum today and to see perfect strangers standing around a bunch of kiosks reading about your most personal, professional experiences? Totally weird, right?
Yes. Well, it was really weird. Eric and I were down there, and they were looking through it, and they saw him in the flesh. That was really exciting for one of the people that were there. You know, so. New job. That's all I really got. You know, but no.
So I'm sure that there must be people here who have questions. We have some microphones and some runners with mics. Any question is a good question here. That's why these guys are here, to help us understand more about their service and why they did it. I hear Eric, Sergeant Stebner, next to me using the word chance, that he was waiting for his chance to deploy, and how you'll read his tour and see how incredibly disappointed he was that his team wasn't picked to be the team to go first, and how you sounded really upset about it at the time. And most people here don't have those experiences. We all have passions, and they're all things that we get excited about and that we want to do, like you were saying. But I personally want to know why did you see that as an opportunity and a chance to go and put yourself in such a dangerous situation, which is not something that, you know, I've ever thought about doing. Most of us run from danger, and you saw it as an opportunity.
I guess the one thing, I found out there are quite a few guys around that did spend time in Ranger Regiment too. I'm not the only guy, so I do have some hidden brothers up here also. But Ranger history, kind of in the past, They've been at a lot of conflicts. And it's usually a short period of time. And you do look up to those that have gone before. You know, it might be how many people jumped into Grenada from Ranger Regiment. Do you know, sir? I don't know. You can Google it. But there's not a whole big group of people. So getting to serve in the organization and be a part of it, yeah, as a goal, a dream, you're like, wow, I'd love to be one of those guys. Before, if you would see a guy with a combat scroll on, you're like, wow, he jumped into Grenada, he jumped into Panama. Wow, you know, and they are looked up to. That was the motivation that you had. You wanted to do what you did. So when it kicked off, and I was like, wow, we're in Ready Force 1, I'm going to get to go. They took another battalion. It was kind of mind-blowing. And then when we did deploy, they only took one company from our battalion. And after we came back, kind of the mentality thought was, wow, I do have my scroll. I'm going to be one of those select few that gets to wear it. Literally, did I not know that the deployments would not stop, and eventually every Ranger would have a combat scroll. But it was just something you wanted to do, you wanted to achieve.
And despite that opportunity, if I asked you the question, what do you gentlemen think about war? How would you answer that?
You know, basically war is not an enduring endeavor. It's better when it's over very quickly. And I think talking to a lot of us last night at a dinner you hosted, you know, we thought the war was over. Less than about 230 special operators, a contingent of Marines, Air Force, which isn't up here, you know, actually thought that this was done.
I didn't think it was over.
He didn't think it was over. Well, there was a lot of high-fiving going on until a few months later when we found ourselves in Iraq, and then now it's just been a constant pace of life.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a, I mean, it's like a firefighter I was equating to earlier. I mean, a firefighter wants to go fight a fire, but if they're going to fight a fire, it's kind of a bad thing that they're leaving the firehouse to go fight a fire. It's the same thing kind of in this line of work, because we train so long and hard at it. You kind of want to go, but you don't really want to go, because if you got to go, it's not a good reason that you're going. So it'd be better if we just kind of never went. But if we got to go, we all come from the mindset or whatever. We want to be the ones that have to do that if somebody's got to go. Maybe we're just all messed up in the head, but I don't know.
There's a particular Bible verse that I know as a young officer I saw on a wall at Ranger Regiment, which kind of epitomizes most of probably the guys up here, and I can't speak for all of them, but the special operations community, and that's Isaiah 6:8. Whom shall go and whom shall I send? And a voice cried out, here I am, send me. And that send me ethos is prevalent throughout the special operations community. And I know for me personally, although I had a pregnant wife and 2 young children, going with my brothers and being the first to get in there and get some payback and to represent our country and get in there and try and sort things out. That is what drove us. We recognized we were very fortunate and we were chosen. It could have been another team that certainly could have had that mission.
Colonel Dill, your view on war, we talked about this last night. I think we talked about human beings and, is it chimpanzees or, right?
Well, I'm not sure where you wanted to go with it, but we were talking about culture anthropology is kind of something I study on the side. But the only other species that commits murder, I mean, animals fight. Don't get me wrong. There's dominance, things like that. You know, dominant, trying to establish dominance for mates and things like that. But the only other species that commits murder is chimpanzees. But
And
I'm not sure where you wanted me to take that.
You know what? I was remembering this. I was remembering the story and remembering that war is a terrible thing. And you were talking about how you felt about war and how no one wants to go to war.
Yeah.
And that, you know, human beings, or maybe it was Scotty. You were talking about that also. It was Scotty. Yeah.
I mean,
a lot of,
I would say there are human beings that want to go to war, and I've been around them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we're fortunate that they're on our sides, but yeah, there are. I think there's a lot of people out there that do kind of seek that, but I think once you've done it, you don't.
I think my quote at the end, though, is we were all young and we wanted to go to war because that's how we, saw ourselves as young soldiers. Now that we're old, tired soldiers, nobody prays for peace more than an old soldier. So it's hard watching the 13th year into this conflict. And, you certainly look at some of my young pictures. I mean, it really took 24 years off my life. And so as this conflict goes and goes, part of my job when I was a senior enlisted advisor at that very senior level was to remind them of the cause of conflict and how it's better to get it over quickly than to linger this thing on.
What questions do we have from the audience? We have microphones.
There's one right there.
Mike.
Thanks for coming. My name is Matt Pilak. Army guy, joined before September 11th, and I'm still in. And I'm curious to get your perspectives because you're sort of in the same boat I am, to see how the Army was prepared before September 11th, the lessons we had to learn over the last 13 years, fighting 2 different wars, and now how the Army appears to be running away from every lesson we learned as fast as humanly possible. What's your general opinion on the direction that we're going now as an Army? And this is my experience in the Army, not to count the Marines out, but even as the military as a whole. Do you think there's anything that we can do to help preserve the lessons learned so we don't find ourselves in a similar place 10, 20 years from now, going to war without body armor that really was even up to snuff? I remember in 2003, I wasn't sure if I was even going to have plates to take with me to my first deployment. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, just quickly from the Marine perspective, I know he wants to hear from the Army, but I mean, frankly, I'm at odds with the institution on where we're going. If you look at the potential for conflict over the next 10 to 15 years, more than likely it's going to be a low-intensity conflict, counterinsurgency type situation. It's not going to be a major conventional war because who would do that right now against the U.S. military and our allies and our coalition? So, but my institution's going back towards training for a big conventional fight, and we call it getting back to our roots, our amphibious roots. But it's not. Like I said, I'm kind of opposed to it, and if but that supports the big military-industrial complex, big conventional wars, and that's being a little bit cynical. But I feel like I can be open here. So that's probably the reason behind it. But we're kind of getting away. We're doing exactly what you said. So, Army.
Yeah, I guess I'll go. This is for non-attribution, I'm assuming. Let me give you my obligatory.
Recorded.
This is what's that?
We are being recorded.
All right. I don't really. We've doing a much better job than we did after Vietnam.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, the former Green Beret, you wrestle with this, and old tired soldiers look back and reflect, but young officers and enlisted that come up, there's so much information that is stored somewhere in some dusty building in Kansas called the Army Center of Lessons Learned, and yet we haven't collectively learned them. And some of those lessons, they don't come back to old soldiers to relearn those lessons. It's they rely on new generations, and it takes a while to filter out where they were. As a matter of fact, if you look at the history of what Ranger School was a capture of a lesson, back into Vietnam time, and yet we still cling on to that lesson. I think that was the monkey and the banana analogy. Is we don't know why we're doing patrol bases in the jungle
very interesting
environment,
conversation last night.
but we do.
Monkeys and bananas, chimpanzees.
We're philosophical here.
Okay.
Comedy troupe, but philosophical.
One thing I'll say, just to add to your question, if the next conflict, the biggest thing I would say, where's it going to be? We've adapted to clearing buildings, driving down roads, urban terrain. The enemy's in civilian clothes. At the end of the night, they go home to their family. You're going to their house to knock on the door to figure out who was the bad guy for the day. Is it going to end up being some jungle environment, Vietnam again, where we're not driving down roads. It's hard to say with the direction they train, because the direction we're going to take, and we kind of do, is the last conflict. How was it? It's going to be urban, I believe, for a while until the next major conflict somewhat changes us around.
Hi, Carrie. Hey, guys. I just wanted to say I got to K2 November 24th, 2011. So I was actually probably with you guys as you're running in and out of Afghanistan, of course. But I was with the AC-130s as an aircraft electrician, and it's not very often I get to talk with the folks that are actually running missions in and out of Afghanistan when we first got there. So it's just kind of cool to hear your stories and hear you guys actually talk about it. People ask me what I did. I kind of joking with my friends say we kind of helped to throw the spear into Afghanistan, but you guys are like the tip of it. So it was kind of cool to meet you guys and what you guys are doing. So thanks.
And I think what we're talking about, you can almost have a panel of 40 people, because there was so many different effects between other government agencies, other families back home, that it is a multi-dimensional, inspiration when at the very hardest part that this country was facing, all of these groups and efforts came together and was united in one focus point, and it had very dramatic effects. And to the last comment, as we get a little bit looser and looser from that time frame, we're not as unified as we were back then, supporting each other for a focus.
Hi, I'm not military, but I had a quick comment and a question for Mark. First of all, I do have two great-grandfathers that actually were the first and last chief of the U.S. Cavalry, and then another ancestor that was largely responsible for ushering out the horse and ushering in the tank. So my mother was so excited when the book Horse Soldiers came out and all that, that her grandfather would get his due, because he was somewhat lampooned for having said that the horse would never ever be replaced by the tank. So she's thrilled with the re-evolution of the reappearance of the horse in combat environments. So my question, however, is relates to stigma. I happen to be involved with therapy that uses storytelling as a device for soldiers, but we don't see very many special forces people there, and it seems that they're, the stigma for seeking mental health support, and this is for all of you, is particularly strong among special forces. And I just wonder if there are any structures within the special forces units that often take care of their own for those kinds of things that particularly address that notion of stigma.
You're both laughing about a very serious topic.
We're apologize for laughing, because it's a very serious issue about the stigma. And I'm going to let Scotty talk about that in just a second. I'm going to cover your question in a couple ways. First, the last U.S. Army cavalry charge was during World War II in the Philippines during the Bataan campaign, I think in 1942. I don't remember the exact date, but you can... I almost said Bing it, but you can Google it, right?
I think someone already...
Sorry. It's okay.
Anyway, to get to your point,
protected our freedoms. Freedom of choice.
No, I want to talk just. Where am I going to go with this? My particular team of 12 guys has continued to serve. We've been through all this. I had senior sergeants from Desert Storm, from this in the Gulf War. They've spent their entire career in special forces and deployed throughout the Middle East and various other hotspots. But every one of those guys stayed in. Two of us left active service, but then have continued to deploy repeatedly. Those sergeants that got out and retired after they went back to Iraq, 5, 6 more deployments. They, even after retiring, have continued to work as instructors to try and help pass on that knowledge within our community in some way. We're continuing to get on with our life to try and continue to contribute in different ways, as are all the other veterans. But that, 9/11 defined our lives in our community, and we are looking to find ways to transition. I'm going to let Scott handle the stigma, I guess. But what I want to say is we feel normal, I guess. You know, I don't feel like I have or need to seek medical attention or counseling for me personally. And yes, we saw a lot of traumatic things on my team, specifically with our personal experience. But there are veterans out there that do need assistance, and there is there was that stigma. I know they've worked hard to change that. A mutual friend of Sergeant Stebner's and I, Nate Self, was a Ranger captain that was one of the first to kind of start to speak about this thing called post-traumatic stress as a Ranger officer, infantry officer, to start to address that. And his book's called Two Wars, where it talks about not just the battle you had with your teammates, but then that battle coming back home to transition.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so now, you know, there seems to be a lot of conversation lately about why aren't people opening up yet. You heard about our grandfathers and everything else that packed it away, and I personally use that analogy in the movie Ghostbusters when they would suck in the demon and they would go to a big wall grid and they would pump it in there, and there's a very dramatic scene where they're begging the person, don't open up that wall. But we have coping mechanisms that are different, and I remind a lot of people that special operations and special forces are highly trained and highly selected, and those one character traits are actually brought out during our selection course. So the way to start engaging and getting people to open up is through leadership of exactly what we're doing here. Okay, starting on the edges, telling a story, and remember, this is a trusted network, and to think a health professional can come in instantly and you will trust them with something that you were, trying to put a little bit further down is difficult. So what I, tend to say to others that instead of, spending years upon years getting a health professional to be trusted, why don't we just equip those that are trusted to be better peers? So.
Great. Other questions?
Yes. Thank you. First, I just want to say that I couldn't be more proud as an American and as a New Yorker to know that all of you were there to defend us after the events of 9/11, so thank you very much. This is kind of directed to Scott and to Mark, but they refer to Special Forces as the quiet professionals. And in a world where everyone is quick to dramatize or romanticize our war fighters as just that, as fighters, can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a quiet professional and how maybe how you're trained to avoid conflict in many situations, avoid fighting and harm to the locals that whose environment you come into?
So for anybody who doesn't know John works for UBS and has very quietly and patiently helped the Green Beret Foundation, and especially Mark, led to that statue you see in the background, which led to the larger one at Ground Zero. And what he's getting at is, we can hardly tell our stories to ourselves, yet, through our engagement strategically, a lot of people have, come around to help us engage. If a Green Beret and Special Forces particularly, we are not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. We're very clever tools. And at any one time, we're deployed between 50 to 55 countries in small elements, usually 12-man team. And we're on the very edges of stability. We're on the very edges of diplomacy. One of those pictures in there, I wore a suit. So a good Special Forces soldier are on the other edges before they boil up into conflicts. And it's funny, at the very end of my time before I retired at 2010, I helped start a program, and I had a very minor part, but it was called Village Stability Operations, which actually put Green Berets and SEALs back into the villagers, treating them dentistry, local medicine, all of these other things that would deliver some of these social services, and they weren't the tools of black helicopters and night vision.
Yeah, I'll answer the part about the quiet professional. I think every organization has a culture. I mean, Google's got a culture. So I think why is it so important to be a quiet professional for something like, especially in special forces, which has 12-person detachment. Ranger regiments, a little larger platoons or companies that they're operating under. But if you fundamentally you got to trust the person that's next to you because your life is on the line with them all the time. And if it's something that someone's out for their own personal gain, then you can't trust them. And then if you can't trust them, you really instead of being down to 11 people, you're really down to 10 because now you got to have somebody watch the person that you can't trust. So I think it really comes down to that. And yeah, there's always going to be some that go out there and I guess write and do stuff after that. But there's been no real book or movie written about getting Saddam Hussein, and that's the way it should be for these kind of things. So that's all I'll say.
Any other questions?
First of all, thank you for. I don't know if this is on. It's on. Okay. Thank you for coming. We're just honored to have you here. I'm curious, what's the most useful thing that any of you have ever seen a civilian do in terms of helping people, service members, when they come back, whether they're still active in the military or when they're exiting? Is there anything in particular that you would say about that? You could tell us.
Yeah, I would say just show up. Tomorrow is going to be Veterans Day, and we're going to be the Google Analytics. The word veterans is going to go spike high, right? And then it's going to come right down the next day. So to me, it's just show up. I'm part of a veteran organization called Team Red, White, and Blue, and to go back what Colonel Eisenhower was saying, veterans returning to communities, not returning to the Pentagon. And they're going to be in your communities, and they're not going to be wearing this. They might not be wearing a suit either, but they're in your communities. And for me, the most important thing is just showing up and introducing yourself and getting to actually know a veteran beyond just the thank you.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too, and I hate to dominate the microphone, but anyways, just like Special Forces and Recon, and we are the military scouts. We go into these very ambiguous areas and we map it out. We get an understanding of the language and the culture and the sensitivities, all these things that intelligence from afar can't tell you. And it's the same thing in communities. So beyond that, how do you take a veteran and you show that amount of patience and you show them business cultures, work cultures, how to start a business, all of these simple mentoring things, because once they're upright in the community, they excel. And I tell everybody, every mission's a business plan. Okay, the truth of why we're selected and we had successful careers are the same characters that a lot of these companies seem to be starving for. Everyone I engage. So if you just take that patience and that little bit of remolding and understand that transition phases that a person goes through, then what you get out of that is you get somebody that's recentered and oriented and just loyal till the day is long, and they become good citizens and employees back in the community.
Any final questions?
Hi, I have one quick question. Thank you so much for being here. I lost my cousin after 2001 in Afghanistan, and just hearing these stories is so amazing and touching. My question is, in 2007 and leading into 2008, when the sentiment at home really started to turn against the war, when Rumsfeld was replaced, and how did that feel internally for you guys in the military? Was it something that the waves of political sentiment come and go, and this is your job and you just go and do your duty, or did you really start to feel it? Did it feel like how we hear about Vietnam vets coming home and they don't get the parades? Did it feel like that, or did it not?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it didn't really impact it. I was actually surprised that the wave probably stayed as long as it did. I expected it to kind of go down a lot sooner because American, we don't have the patience for a long war. It's just we were worried about quarterly earnings, not long-term growth. So I expected it to die down a lot sooner than it did. So it didn't really impact me, but I'm sure others might have a different opinion.
So once again, you know, it's interesting that I went from the tactical aspects of being on the ground deployed 5 to 6 times continuously, usually 2 months at a time, and you're not aware of the politics side. That's what's unique about soldiers, is we really don't get into policy, politics, and public perception, the 3 bad Ps. But then when I went to this strategic headquarters, and I started realizing that, you know, they really are what shapes, you know, America's military and how it looks at, you know, fighting this war, restricting resources. And I saw the fight at a different level from the distance of Washington to manage the public perception, yet the soldiers, once again, were still motivated about that day, 9/11, and what they're going for. And if you still look at it, you know, the recruitment was still high. There were still youth joining the military. They still believed in the cause of their fight. What had shifted was, you know, how we were going to, you know, maintain that. And now we had a different magnet, and that magnet was the politics and the public pressure that kind of started to bend things.
Any final questions?
First, I want to thank Carrie, by the way. We first met, we had a little event at the National 9/11 Museum as a way for us to put closure to the effects of war and start talking about our own transition. And Carrie came there a little bit patient at first, but she has really been a tiger in the veterans space and wants to know how Google can help, because they have tools and they have a brand that everybody admires and loves. And we began working, you know, very closely after that. And really every day she has worked very hard along with everybody else that you probably don't see behind the scenes, and understanding the National 9/11 Museum and understanding New York City and its feelings for that very day, that this really is truly monumental. And if I were in this organization, I would learn how initiatives begin and how they come together at the end, and that needs to be studied as well, because it really was, you know, a drive and a vision that finally became reality by this panel today.
Thank you, Scotty. I say this a lot, and I really mean it, that the inspiration is so strong that it makes it easy for me to do my job. I know so many service members and count them as friends, you among them at this point, and it's easy to see why I love what I do. When there are incredible stories like those on the stage that you all have been sharing. I want to make one final comment, which is many of these gentlemen have their family members here today in this audience, and while we talk a lot about the heroism that happens in the military and the type of personality that is able to sustain all kinds of serious danger, there are people who are at home who are taking care of these families and making sure that that these men have a life to come home to. The burden on the families is absolutely enormous. Mark shared among the most difficult, and so did so did several other people here. There are tremendous sacrifices on a personal basis that are made so that when there is a need, there are people in this country who are willing to go and put themselves in harm's way so that the rest of us don't have to. And I really want to take a moment to recognize those women who are here, who held down those families and took care of those children and made sure that that the family unit survived and sustained these individuals to go in and do the types of things that they did. So if we could, I'm going to ask you all to stand up. Please do, because it's your day too. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to call up Colonel Eisenhower, and we can stay up here. Colonel James Eisenhower is a special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He commands the Office of Reintegration, and Colonel Eisenhower is a tremendous partner and friend of ours here at Google. His office is tasked with facilitating inter-service communication, fostering community solutions to the challenges facing veterans and military families, and to further civilian military understanding, which is what this panel was all about today. Colonel Eisenhower.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk. Happy birthday to the Marines, 239 years. And 69 years ago today also is very important because Army beat Notre Dame 48-0, and we're the national champions. So that's where I live. I wanted to stand back here and thank Carrie because this is what I know of Liam Collins. It's the back view. She said Liam can run a mile in 6 minutes. No, Liam can run 2 miles in about 9:20. Slower, a little slower, 9:40. Yeah, and we were classmates at West Point, and I only knew the back view of Liam because when you run the APFT at West Point, you do it in groups of like 20, and there's 4,000 cadets there, and you do it over the course of days. And I kept getting put in Liam's group, and he would run in like 9:20, and he would be, by the time I finished, I was passing, but by the time I finished, he was showered and had a pizza out and was dining. And so this guy, 6 minutes is what he runs when I'm on his back. Carrie, thanks very much for asking us to come up here and for putting this on, and thanks to Google. Thanks to all of you for your contribution to the common defense. And you're probably wondering why I'm saying that now, and I'll be really quick with you. The chairman, General Dempsey, for whom I work, has no statutory obligation when it comes to service members after they leave the service. Neither does DOD. But he says we've got a moral obligation to take care of these men and women who have served. So he's put our office together. We've got several lieutenant colonels and a colonel, and we, in the chairman's office of reintegration, try to go out and understand where there are fantastic examples of effective reintegration mechanisms, and we take that and we share it. We're really just a knowledge broker. We're not bringing anybody money, and we're not bringing anybody manpower. But let me tell you why I think that's important. Reintegration's hard. And they had a great question over here of what's the most important or significant thing that civilians have done. And I would submit to you, answering the question, is that it's more than just a handshake. You'll hear the chairman say often, we don't need a handout, we need a handshake. I'd ask you to follow it up with just a brief conversation. It's a dialogue. Why? Because all we know for the duration of our service is the military culture. Most of us entered right out of high school or right out of college. We know nothing else when it comes to our adult life. And military culture is necessarily very different than the civilian community because at the end of the day, we must be effective warfighters. That culture will always be different. You are masters of the civilian community because you live and thrive there. Believe it or not, it's intimidating to us. We are far more comfortable going in from 18,000 feet into Afghanistan or getting on the back of a striker and riding into downtown Baghdad in the middle of the surge than we would be to try to navigate the civilian landscape here in New York City and find a job. We're not good at it. You know it, and you can help us manage that process by simply giving us advice. Ask us how we're doing. If we need any advice based off of your own expertise, say, look, I've been here at Google for this many years. I've been here in New York City for 5 years. Do you have a dentist? Do you have a church? Where do you think you want to work? What are you thinking about doing? If you can help us navigate the landscape, you help us become much more successful, and we will become the civic assets that you've already heard veterans typically tend to become. The chairman published an op-ed a year and a half ago, and it was a shot across the bow to everyone in uniform. When we talk about the civil-military divide, most people say, well, the civilians need to understand more about the military. And you all have done a wonderful job of allowing us a platform where we can share with you some of the characteristics and things that make military culture different and that professional ethos unique and distinct. But the chairman said to those wearing uniform, we need to understand more about the civilian community. So that's where I'd ask you to come in. Help us. Extend the hand, but follow that handshake with a short discussion or a short dialogue that helps us navigate this difficult terrain. That will make all the difference in the world. And here's why. The target for us is the dinner time conversation that's going to happen in 10 years when a young lady asks her mom or dad which service she should join. We don't want it to be, should I join the service, but which service should I join? And the counsel she's going to get from her parents and from her priest and from her soccer coach and counselor is going to be shaped by the success with which we embrace veterans today here in New York City and across the country. And if they see our society embrace veterans and recognize them for the civic assets we know they can become, then you're going to preserve the all-volunteer force. And you're going to encourage those kids, the youth of today, to raise their hand and take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's your contribution to the common defense. So on behalf of General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, thanks for your contribution to the common defense today. And I'd hope you take this example that Google has set for the rest of us and propagate it across our country and try to embrace veterans and understand more about them, but help us understand more about the civilian community to which we will all return. Thanks very much.
With that, I'd love to wish a happy Veterans Day to all of our service members who are here today, to thank you for your service, and thank you to you gentlemen for sharing your most personal stories with us in an effort to make this community here at Google and everyone watching this video online eventually aware of the fact that in their community there are veterans there as well. I love the idea of following up a handshake with a conversation. We try to do that here. We care deeply about supporting the transition of our veterans and our military families, and we'll continue to do so for a long time to come. Thank you, everyone.